Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today and for all of your work and commitment to conducting these reviews that you'll be putting in during the coming weeks. We really appreciate your time and effort that you're putting into evaluating these applications. And this orientation is going to cover information for both the Clinical Prevention and Biological Sciences panel and the Community Impact panel. And both program officers are on the call. I am Jen Fernandez-Poole. I'm one of the program officers with the CBCRP, and I will be working on the Community Impact panel. And also on the call is Katie McKenzie, the program officer for Clinical Prevention and Biological Sciences panel. While we move through the meeting today, we'll stop periodically for questions, and you can also enter your questions using the chat feature if you don't want to lose your thought before we stop for questions. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to it after the call. Okay. So here is our overall agenda for today. We're going to begin with an overview of our funding process, and we're going to talk then a bit about the priority areas and award types that we fund. And these are going to be high-level descriptions, but you'll also find a lot of details in your reviewer materials and the manual. And both Katie and I are available on this webinar and afterward to answer any specific questions about any of the programmatic pieces of today's presentation. We're also going to talk about the application scoring and review process. And then today we will finish up by walking you through how we'll be using the Smart Simple system in our review. And so we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have two review panels that we will be holding this year. One at the beginning of the month on May 1st, and then one all the way at the end of the month on May 29th. And here you see a bit of information about the chairs and the co-chairs that will be leading us through these reviews. And we're so pleased to have them on the call today. And also you see information about how many awards, how many applications will be in each review panel. And they're pretty well, they're pretty even in that there are 12 in the first panel that you see and 13 in the second panel that you see. And telling you a bit about our overall structure of grant funding, CBCRP does only fund research in California, and we offer our core funding in a single cycle. So our funding process involves two levels of review, and each level emphasizes different criteria for assessing the applications. So with you all, we rely on you, the peer reviewers, to tell us which applications are scientifically meritorious. And beyond that, the CBCRP Council, which is composed of scientists, advocates, clinicians, nonprofit, and for-profit organization representatives. They conduct an independent programmatic review of the applications for qualities that make the project particularly relevant for CBCRP. A couple of examples of that is the levels of advocacy involvement in the project, described in the project, and addressing the needs of the underserved. So the bottom line is that the successful applicants need to submit high quality, programmatically relevant research projects. Next, we'll talk a bit about our research areas. So in terms of our priorities, one important thing to share with you is that CBCRP was established when advocates and research clinicians partnered with California legislature to win passage of the Breast Cancer Act legislation. And what that did was it established a 2-cent tax on cigarettes. Half of that funding is devoted to research funding. This cycle, CBCRP will have about $4 million to devote to research applications reviewed in these panels. CBCRP is interested in funding research that will make an impact in all breast cancer topics. So you'll see that our priority areas, they cross the spectrum of the disease. Although in your panels, you may not see all topics. And all award types in the community impact priority issue are being reviewed in the community impact panel. Most idea and translational research applications all idea and translational research applications in the etiology and prevention, the biology of the breast cell, and the detection, prognosis, and treatment, those are being reviewed in the clinical prevention and biological sciences panel. The primary concern is that the research must directly address a breast cancer issue or question. And I want to tell you a bit about the different award types that I mentioned on the previous slide. So the IDEA Award is an award focused on speculative, exploratory, and high-risk, high-reward projects with a primary focus on breast cancer. And the idea here is seeding new directions. So strong applications are charting new directions in their topic area. It should not be the next logical step in the investigator's research necessarily or in the field of research, but should challenge existing paradigms. Because we're looking for new ideas, don't exactly expect preliminary data, but the project needs good rationale and literature support. IDEA awards have a maximum duration of 18 months, and they are projects with human participants and/or that are using animal models. They're eligible to apply for a maximum of $150,000 for their direct costs. And if the project does not have human subjects or animal models, or requires a human subjects exemption, it is eligible for the $100,000 cap. And on the other end of the conceptual spectrum are the translational research awards. The research should move the topic into practical applications in the populations that will benefit from them. The outcomes themselves actually could be clinical, public health, and health policy. And these applications must involve human participants. They need to move into the population that they are meant to serve by the conclusion of the project. And applicants can request up to 3 years of funding for a total of $750,000 direct cost. And the purpose of our community research collaboration awards are to support teams of community organizations and members and experienced academically trained folks to perform well-defined, rigorous research on breast cancer questions that are important to the community and grow out of the community. And the CIRC Pilot Awards last for up to 1.5 years, and they are up to $150,000 direct cost. So these types of awards are going to support initial phases of the project, as you see listed here. And a primary component of it is that there is equity and there is partnership between the academic and community principal investigators, and that the community of interest is actively involved in the project from the beginning, from the inception of the idea, all the way out through dissemination of research findings. So a pilot award can fill in gaps in partnership, current partnership, or research needs. Then there is the full award. That is up to $600,000 for up to 3 years. And these are for projects with a fully developed research plan and a well-integrated team. And so this oftentimes CERC full awards are supporting the completion of some research that has begun in a pilot CERC award. Not always, but often. Now we're going to walk through our review process. So reviewers score all applications using the 1 to 9 range, with 1 being the best and 9 being the worst. And here you see the descriptions of each of those number ratings. We do encourage you to use the full scoring range to communicate your enthusiasm about an application. And you will score 4 equally weighted components for each application. Those 4 component criteria, they will vary by award type. And we're briefly going to go through the components for each award type. So for the pilot and the full CERC, there are 2 aspects or 2 components that are focused on the science. That is the quality of the research and the feasibility. And then there are 2 components that are focused on the partnership and community benefit. And so you see a description of each of the 4 criteria here. And you'll see that the quality of the research and the feasibility is really looking at the importance of the questions and the appropriateness of the method and the use of an appropriate conceptual framework and how the methods and analysis plan also map onto that. The partnership and community involvement reflects what I said on the previous slide about community and the principal investigator being partnered with for all phases of the project, from coming up with the question to designing the application, also doing the work and letting folks know about what they found in their work. So there needs to be a strong integration of the community partners' knowledge at all of these phases. Another critical element is there needs to be an agreement in place, or agreements in place rather, that regarding procedures for any disagreements that may come up among the collaborators, ownership of data, different activities and what will be undertaken by which partner, etc. The community benefit piece is really looking at how the research project will facilitate further learning, further collaboration, and will translate into tangible benefits for the community. For the idea scoring and review criteria, this award type is the most extreme in its definition, in that we're looking for risk-taking, speculative, and potentially paradigm-shifting research. Now, impact should not be judged by its potential effect on breast cancer, impact should be judged by its potential effect on breast cancer if the premise is successful. So the immediacy of the impact is not as much of a concern. And the approach, we're asking folks to look at, have they designed a study in a way that will allow them to answer their questions and address their aims? And finally, feasibility. Do they have the skills and resources on the team that are necessary to carry out the project? So if the submission is from a new investigator, you should put less emphasis on track record. For the translational applications, in the approach, once again, have they designed a study in a way that will actually address their aims? For feasibility, do they have the expertise and resources in place to carry out the study? For translational potential, if this project is done, will it result in a product or a service or intervention that could be used by the target population, and how soon? For the critical path and the research barrier, we ask that they have operationalized the translational potential of the research project and have anticipated potential barriers and have noted a strategy for addressing those barriers should they occur. So all applications are also evaluated for the appropriateness of the budget, any overlap, protection of humans, and care and use of vertebrate animals. And these components are commented on, but they are not scored. And one of the pieces that we ask all reviewers to be aware of is managing any unconscious bias. So CBCRP is working to eliminate structural and implicit or unconscious bias in every aspect of the program, and that includes the review process. Because humans come with biases, as we all know, in the form of both explicit preconceptions about a particular person or group and implicit preconceptions operating outside of conscious awareness. We need to take steps to manage both. So at CBCRP, we manage explicit biases through conflict of interest policies, selection of reviewers, and bringing a wide range of expertise, experience, and perspective to the consideration of each application. And implicit or unconscious bias is challenging in that it can be ingrained and therefore takes more effort to recognize and change. Implicit bias affecting reviews can be characterized in a few different ways, and some of the commonly identified categories include bias against gender and sexuality, bias against race, racial or ethnic groups or cultural biases. Also institutional bias, which is the tendency to assume that appropriate resources are associated with the size of the institution or the reputation or based on reputation. There's also association bias, which is the tendency to make allowances for investigators who are known to the reviewer based on their reputation in the field or familiarity. And there are several ways that folks have found to manage unconscious bias. Some of the highest level points we've summarized here on this slide, which includes evaluating your judgments periodically and considering whether unconscious biases may be influencing your decisions. Also, one thing that our reviewers have found very useful and do all the time is spending sufficient time evaluating each application, maintaining your standard and applying the criteria consistently to all applications throughout the review process. Evaluating everyone's entire application, so don't rely too heavily on only one element of the application to evaluate an applicant. Also keeping in check your tendencies, any tendencies that one may have to focus the score on grammar or writing quality. And one thing that has been very useful is when reviewers are writing their critiques and use microaffirmations that focus a bit less on criticism and more on constructive suggestions. There are going to be more resources and tools to talk more about managing implicit bias, and they are included in your reviewer manual. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk about the review process and more.
Thank you, Sen. And before I start, I want to just take a beat to see if there are any questions so far, because Sen covered a lot of information just then.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Sure.
Every once in a while, particularly on the translational mechanism, we get a grant that looks like a continuation or had something that had been previously funded by this program. Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
It is indifferent. It is, you would need to look and see whether the previous project is still, you know, I mean, how much the new project is advancing the previous project, but that would kind of be the same for any grant that's being built from another grant. And so, yeah, just because we funded it before doesn't necessarily mean it's a good translational research grant, but it doesn't hurt it either.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, as Sen mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the review process that we use. And we have several reviewer roles that we bring people on the panels to fill. We have our chairs, and the chairs are responsible for moderating the discussion, making sure that all of the applications get a fair review, both in terms of time and consideration. And sometimes we assign chairs to review applications, in which case they will write written reviews, but otherwise it's just summarizing the committee discussion. Our scientific and advocate reviewers are all recruited from outside of California and are responsible for writing application evaluations based on the criteria that Sen described, and you should plan to write on each component as well as giving your overall evaluation. And advocates should focus on giving their lived perspective on the application as well. We have ad hoc reviewers who are reviewers that bring in specific expertise for one or a few applications and then participate for those applications and then drop out of the panel. And we have a California Advocate Observer. This is an advocate who is based in California. We invite the Advocate Observer because we see this program as built from the energy of advocates in the breast cancer space and in our origin. And we want to make sure that we are as transparent as possible while still holding the confidentiality and fairness strongly. So the California Advocate Observer sits on the committees and can provide California's perspective to the discussion and give feedback to our council about how the process went. But they are not voting members of the panel, and so they are not going to be scoring the applications or providing any written critiques. Next slide. Every reviewer has a specific role beyond their overall role on the panel. That on each application, a reviewer, we have assigned a primary and secondary and advocate reviewer, and on some applications we also assign a tertiary reviewer. If you were assigned at these levels, you have slightly different responsibilities. All reviewers are, as I mentioned, are going to score the scientific component scores and give their overall summary. The primary and secondary reviewers, however, are also going to give us feedback on use of animals and human subjects, the budget, and give the primary reasons for their overall ratings. Actually, all reviewers will do that. The budget, as Sen mentioned, and the human subjects discussion will happen after scoring and will not be part of the score unless it is something that's so problematic that it affects the scientific merit. At the meeting, the assigned reviewers will all be giving oral presentations of their reviews, and all unassigned and assigned reviewers may read the applications, read the abstracts of the applications, and provide feedback to CBCRP. We'll be sending you surveys afterwards. You are not required to read all of the applications, all the abstracts, but it's helpful in the committee discussion if you do have a feel for the applications that you're not assigned to. The chair is responsible for providing the overview of the discussion, chairing the discussion and providing the overview of the main points of the discussion before the scoring takes place, and for reading all of the application, definitely abstracts and as many applications as they can. Next. Before the meeting, what we expect that you will be doing is signing on to Smart Simple. Hopefully everyone has signed on to Smart Simple, and declaring your conflicts of interest on any applications that the committee will review. You can, once you are assigned in the system, you will be able to download offline critiques. This will allow you to write your critiques outside of the system, so you don't have to sit and type in the HTML fields, but you will have to copy and paste your critiques back into Smart Simple and enter your scores into Smart Simple in order for them to be recorded. Once you have entered your scores for a particular application, you'll be able to see the other reviewers' critiques. Please feel free to look at other reviewers after you've submitted yours. If you have any, if they brought up any points that you agree with or wish to explore further in your review, you may update your reviews. You will have up until the week before, I'll give you the exact date, before the panel meets to finalize your preliminary scores. If the review committee is going to conduct triage, you will be notified of which applications will be triaged based on your preliminary scores. The chair and the staff will determine whether a triage is warranted and share the list. I'll share the list with you before the panel so that you can take a look and see whether or not you agree with triaging the application. Talk about what happens next in the next slide, which is what happens at the meeting. If a triage is going to be performed, the chair will lead a discussion about it at the beginning of the meeting. Any applications that were put on the triage list can be brought back into the committee discussion just by any reviewer who has read it saying, I would like to discuss this application. Once we have finalized the triage list, we will begin with the first application in the review schedule by displaying the preliminary scores. The reviewers will confirm that we have the preliminary scores correct, or if you've decided to change your scores, you can change it then. Then the primary reviewer will give an overview of the application and then provide the strengths and weaknesses for each component and conclude by emphasizing which components, which issues drove their score the most. The secondary, and if there is a tertiary reviewer, will focus on the differences from the primary reviewer and perhaps the strong agreements, but do not need to give their full review. However, they should be able to complete their comments without interruption. The advocate reviewer provides her summary and any specifics about the scores. Then the chair opens up the discussion for the full committee. Any points raised by the reviewers can be discussed. Once the chair feels that all of the relevant issues have been raised, the chair will bring the committee discussion to an end. You do not have to reach consensus. It's just that the discussion needs to have aired all of the concerns or strengths. All reviewers will, at the end of the discussion, the assigned reviewers will state their final scores, and then all reviewers will enter their scores into Smart Simple, including the assigned reviewers. They'll have to, even if they haven't changed their scores, they'll have to enter their final scores in Smart Simple. Once all of the scores are entered into the system, the primary and secondary reviewers will discuss any human and animal subject concerns or any budget recommendations that they'd make. Once that's concluded, we will move on to the next application. We've gone through all the applications and the meeting is concluded. You will have 1 week to update your written critiques. And we ask that if the discussion has changed your opinion about an application or about a component or about anything to do with the application, please make sure that it is reflected in your written comments. I see a question about voting out of range. Yes, a reviewer may vote out of range. We ask that if you are not assigned to the application and you are voting out of range, that you announce that you're going to vote out of range, because we want to make sure that everybody knows what the issues, if there are any issues that were not clear from the review committee discussion that would drive a reviewer to vote out of range, we want to make sure that those are aired, but you may vote out of range. And so, yeah, and that also can be reflected, the issue can also be reflected. We write a discussion for the applicant in the critique. So that's also why we really want to emphasize that your enthusiasm and your written comments should be consistent with the scores, your final scores. Next slide. Conflicts of interest. You hopefully, if you will be provided with the personnel list, if you haven't already, depending on where you are in our review process, of all the proposals in the committee. And if you see any of your proposals, whether you're assigned to them or not, where you have a conflict, please mark it in Smart Simple, and then you won't be able to see that application anymore. We do get a notification, but it does help to let your program officer know. And if you find that you have a conflict of interest at any point during your review, please let your program officer know as soon as possible so that we can work through the reassignments, and your co-reviewers will appreciate it immensely if you find those COIs as soon as possible. Once you've identified a COI and marked it in Smart Simple, as I mentioned, you won't be able to access that application in the system anymore. And when we cover that review, we will ask you to leave the room while the review is being conducted, and we'll invite you to return when the review is complete. I think the only other thing I'd say about conflict of interest is that the description of what is a conflict of interest is included in your reviewer manual. So, but if you have any questions, if you look through that and you still have a question, please reach out to your program officer and we'll work through whether or not it's an actual conflict. Confidentiality. Everything about this committee is confidential. Please only discuss applications with CBCRP staff and other reviewers on your panel. When you're done with your reviews, and what I mean is when you're done with your final rewrites, hold on to them for a little while while we work through the summary statements. But once the whole process is complete, please erase all applications from your hard drives, your flash drives, your electronic devices, anything that you've printed out. We want to keep everything, the applicants' names, the institutions, and of course the projects confidential. And finally, some dates to keep in mind for your panels. We were looking for your initial score. It's 1 week before the committee meets. So that's April 24th for clinical prevention of biological sciences, May 22nd for community impact. Your meetings will begin at 8 o'clock, although we will be opening breakfast at 7:30 and run to 3 p.m. for clinical prevention of biological sciences and 5 p.m. for community impact. And then, as I mentioned, you'll have a week following the panel to complete your written critiques. Any questions about the process? And then next slide. Ben lied to you a bit at the beginning of this this orientation. We're not going to walk through Smart Simple in this particular orientation. However, following this, I will send you a link to a video of a step-by-step process for interacting with Smart Simple. But if you have any questions about it following, you should contact RGPO grants at ucop.edu because they're going to be the best ones to help you with any technical issues you have. If you have any trouble accessing the system, they're also the ones that you should contact. If you have any questions about the programmatic issues, about scoring, about the intent of the applications, anything about potential conflicts of interest, please reach out to your program officer. And what's not on here, because this is the first time, we're very excited that we're going to have in-person meetings again after COVID. If you have any questions about the logistics of the meetings, about your hotel or flight, please also reach out to RGPO grants at ucop.edu. That will be the fastest way to get to the right person. And I want to finish off by echoing Sen's thanks for your participation in this committee. We really cannot do this without you, and we're looking forward to seeing you in person. And I want to give one more chance for any final questions before we close out.
I do see that we have a question that came in through the chat. For the review meeting, do we bring our own laptop or use the laptop you set up in the meeting room?
We will have some laptops for you if you don't want to bring your own laptop, but you can, but you're not required to use our laptops. And it would be ideal if you are not planning to bring your laptop to let RGPO grants know. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very, very much. And of course, if you have any questions right after this shuts down or any time before your meeting, please do reach out to us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.